Hi, and welcome back to the channel for the haunting horror. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment before viewing. Enjoy your viewing. My thumb hovered over the like button, the screen reflecting the dull glow of my apartment. The end. Brace yourselves for the supernova. The article blurred, a grainy image of a collapsing star splashed across the background. It reeked of clickbait, the kind of internet doom-scrolling I usually avoided. Seriously, Sarah. A groan came from the doorway. My roommate, Maya, stood there, hair messy from sleep, a half-eaten bowl of cereal clutched in her hand. Another end-of-the-world prophecy. You know those are always fake. I shrugged, tempted to close the article. Yet, a strange pull held me back. The comments section was unusually quiet, a stark contrast to the usual flurry of outrage and memes under such articles. Maybe it's different this time. I mumbled, more to myself than to Maya. Different. Sarah, the last one was about a rogue asteroid the size of Texas. We're still here, aren't we? Maya plopped down beside me, her spoon scraping the ceramic bowl. The article claimed the source was a disgruntled astrophysicist with proof the sun's closest neighbor was about to go supernova. It offered no fancy graphics or scientific jargon, just chillingly simple language. Earth will be engulfed by a wave of radiation in 6 months. Prepare accordingly. See, typical internet nonsense. Maya scoffed, scrolling through her phone. Probably some teenager trying to get attention. Unease prickled my skin. Maybe it was just the dim lighting, but the article seemed to pulsate with a strange urgency. A sudden urge to call my parents, miles away, washed over me. Maybe we should check the news, I suggested, my voice shaking slightly. Maya paused, finally looking up from her phone. Her eyes widened slightly. Seriously. Flipping on the TV, I navigated to the news channel. My heart sank. The scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Supernova threat. Scientists confirm impending disaster. An authoritative-looking woman in a crisp suit filled the screen. Good evening. As you may have seen online, there is a confirmed threat of a nearby supernova. While the exact time frame is uncertain, scientists are predicting a major extinction event within the next 6 months. The room seemed to shrink. Maya's spoon clattered onto the floor, the cereal clattering after it. We exchanged a panicked look. This wasn't clickbait anymore. The news report continued, outlining government plans for emergency shelters and resource distribution. Panic welled within me. Images of supermarket shelves stripped bare, gas lines stretching for miles, and societal breakdown flashed through my mind. We need to get ready, I whispered, my throat dry. Maya picked herself up, her eyes mirroring my terror. Ready for what? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Survival, I replied, the word heavy in the air. Sleep was a distant memory. The news droned on, interspersed with interviews with panicked citizens and frantic government briefings. My phone buzzed incessantly, messages from friends and family, a mix of disbelief, terror, and desperate pleas for a plan. Maya and I sat huddled on the couch, the air thick with a suffocating tension. Fallout shelter, I finally said, breaking the silence. We need to find one. A choked laugh escaped Maya. A fallout shelter. Sarah, we live in a second-floor apartment in Brooklyn. Do you think we haven't seen those old movies? This is different, I insisted, my voice trembling. It's the end, Maya. We need to find somewhere safe. I pulled up a government website listing designated shelters in our area. Most were already at capacity, a stark reminder of the ticking clock hanging over our heads. Look, Maya said, pointing at a listing on the outskirts of the city. Maple Street Elementary. It's still taking registrations. Hope flickered in my chest. We need supplies then, I declared, rising with renewed purpose. Food, water, first aid. The supermarket was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Crowds surged through the aisles, desperate hands fighting over dwindling supplies. Gone were the neatly stacked shelves, replaced by a chaotic mess of overturned carts and scattered products. We pushed our way through the throng, dodging elbows and frantic pleas. An overflowing shopping cart careened past us, narrowly missing Maya's leg. "This is insane," she yelled over the din. "We need to get to the canned goods," I shouted back, adrenaline coursing through me. As we rounded a corner, we came face to face with a woman wrestling a case of bottled water with another shopper. The older woman, her face contorted in fear, let out a shriek and lost her grip. The water bottles tumbled to the floor, sending a spray of plastic across the aisle. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. A burly man, his eyes wild with panic, shoved me aside, grabbing the remaining bottles from the mess. "Get your own, lady," he snarled, disappearing into the crowd. Fury surged through me. This wasn't about fear anymore. It was about survival of the fittest, and I refused to be another victim. "Hey!" I screamed at the man's retreating back. "There's enough for everyone." My voice was lost in the cacophony, with a new resolve hardened within me. This wasn't a civilized world anymore. This was a fight for survival, and I was ready to fight back. We emerged from the supermarket with a meager haul, a few cans of beans, a dented box of crackers, and a single bottle of water. The feeling of victory was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing fear as we weaved through the ever-growing crowds outside. "We need to get out of here," Maya gasped, her face pale. "Before it gets worse." The once familiar street was unrecognizable, choked with overflowing cars, honking horns a symphony of despair. Traffic cops had long vanished, replaced by a primal scramble towards some perceived safety. My throat tightened. Our apartment was no longer an option. We needed to reach Maple Street Elementary before it was too late. "There's a bus stop a few blocks away," I said, spotting a yellow sign amidst the chaos. "Maybe we can find one still running." Pushing through the throng, dodging abandoned shopping bags and irate pedestrians, we arrived at the bus stop. It was deserted, the usual metal bench ripped from its moorings and thrown to the side. "What now?" Maya asked, her voice laced with despair. A distant rumble echoed through the air, growing louder by the second. Panic surged through me. Sirens, explosions. My mind conjured terrifying images of a world falling apart. "Look," Maya pointed across the street. "There's a cab." A beat-up yellow taxi sat precariously at the curb. The driver slumped over the wheel. It seemed too good to be true. "Hey!" I yelled, rushing towards the car. "Mister, we need a ride." The driver, a wiry man with sweat beading on his forehead, looked up with a start. He was shaking, his eyes bloodshot. But even in his terrified state, a flicker of suspicion crossed his face. "Where are you going, ladies?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Maple Street Elementary," I blurted. "It's a shelter." The driver's expression remained unreadable for a tense beat. Finally, he sighed, a weary acceptance settling on his features. "Get in," he mumbled, "but it won't be cheap." Desperate and without alternatives, we clambered into the back seat. The stench of stale sweat and fear hung heavy in the air. As the taxi lurched forward, joining the throngs fleeing the city, Maya leaned against me, her body trembling. "Do you think we'll make it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I squeezed her hand, the fear a cold knot in my stomach. "We have to—" I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. In this world of panic and desperation, hope was a fragile thing. But it was all we had left. The drive to Maple Street Elementary was a harrowing journey. The streets resembled a post-apocalyptic wasteland, littered with abandoned cars and debris. The once familiar buildings looked alien, their windows dark and empty. As we inched forward, horns blared and engines sputtered, the collective scream of a city on the brink. "This is insane," Maya whimpered, clutching the backpack filled with our meager supplies. "Just a few more blocks," I gritted out, trying to mask the terror gnawing at my insides. We couldn't afford to lose hope now. Finally, a familiar red brick building emerged through the chaos. "There, Maple Street Elementary," I exclaimed, relief flooding through me. But the scene outside the school was nothing like the orderly registration we'd envisioned. A throng of frantic people swarmed the entrance, a desperate mass pushing and shoving to get inside. Armed guards stood at the doors, struggling to maintain order. "This isn't right," Maya muttered, her voice tight with anxiety. "We need to show them our registration," I said, pushing my way towards the front. But the crowd surged forward, a wave of panicked bodies threatening to engulf us. Suddenly, a woman screamed. A man had tripped, sending a domino effect through the crowd. People stumbled and fell, trampled by the desperate surge towards the doors. Panic clawed at my throat. I spun around, searching for an escape. There, a side door hung slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out. "Maya!" I yelled, grabbing her arm. "There!" We sprinted towards the side door, dodging flailing limbs and panicked shouts. Reaching the door, I threw my weight against it, praying it wouldn't be locked. It creaked open, revealing a dark hallway. "Come on," I urged Maya, pulling her inside and slamming the door shut behind us. We stood in the darkness, hearts pounding. The muffled screams and chaos from outside were a chilling reminder of the world we'd just left. "What now?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. A single, flickering light bulb cast an eerie glow on a dusty notice board. Scrawled in messy handwriting were directions to a secondary shelter in the basement. With a shared look of grim determination, we followed the crudely drawn map, the silence around us a stark contrast to the pandemonium outside. This wasn't the safe haven we'd envisioned, but it was a chance. And in a world falling apart, even a chance felt like a miracle. The stale smell of disinfectant and mildew assaulted our nostrils as we descended the dank concrete steps. The flickering fluorescence cast long, grotesque shadows on the damp walls, each creak and groan echoing like a malevolent whisper. "Are you sure this is the way?" Maya whispered, clutching my arm tightly. "There's nowhere else to go," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The urgency in my tone masked the rising fear within me. This wasn't a shelter. It felt more like a tomb. We reached the bottom of the stairs, the metal door at the end of the corridor groaning open with a rusty hiss. A single dim bulb illuminated a cavernous space filled with rows of metal cots and overflowing cardboard boxes. A figure huddled on a cot stirred, a ragged beard framing bloodshot eyes. He looked at us warily, muttering something under his breath. Several other figures lay scattered around the room, their faces etched with despair. "Hello," I called out tentatively. "We're here for the shelter." A gruff voice emerged from the shadows. A tall, muscular man with a shaved head stood by a makeshift barricade of stacked boxes, a crowbar clutched in his hand. "Shelter's full," he growled, his gaze flickering between us and the meager supplies in our backpacks. "Find your own damn corner." Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't the refuge we desperately needed. It was a den of desperation, a microcosm of the chaos raging above. "We just need a place to stay," Maya pleaded, stepping forward. "There's nowhere else to go." The man's gaze narrowed. He surveyed us again, then slowly lowered the crowbar. "You got anything useful?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. "We have some canned food, water," I began, unsure what he was after. "Medical supplies," he interrupted, a flicker of desperation flashing in his eyes. "Bandages, anything." It hit me then. This wasn't about keeping people safe. This was about survival of the fittest, even within the supposed safety of the shelter. We don't have anything like that," I admitted, feeling a pang of guilt mixed with relief. He grunted, stepping aside with a sigh. "Fine, find a corner, but don't expect any handouts." We shuffled through the packed room, the air thick with tension and despair. Finally, we settled near the back corner, on two dusty cots pushed together. Maya leaned against me, her face pale. "This isn't what I imagined," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Me neither," I whispered, pulling her close. "But it's somewhere." Somewhere. It felt like a hollow word in the oppressive atmosphere of the basement shelter. The world outside was crumbling, and our supposed haven offered little comfort. But in the face of despair, even a damp corner in a makeshift shelter felt like a lifeline. For now, the basement thrummed with a chaotic rhythm, the constant murmur of anxiety, the occasional cough or muffled sob, the ever-present creak of the metal door straining against the weight of the world outside. Sleep was a distant luxury replaced by a restless awareness that gnawed at us like a persistent hunger. Days turned into a blur of stale food, shared anxieties, and tense glances at the dwindling supplies. The promised emergency rations never arrived, replaced by rumors of dwindling resources and escalating violence outside. One morning, a commotion erupted near the front of the shelter. People jostled, voices rising in panic. We squeezed through the makeshift crowd to find a man sprawled on the floor, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle, a bloodied crowbar lying discarded beside him. He tried to steal my stash. A burly man with a shaved head bellowed, pointing at the woman kneeling beside the injured man. "We have rules here." The woman, tears streaming down her face, looked around in desperation. "He just needed something for his fever. We have nothing left." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. It was clear. The fragile peace within the shelter had shattered. Fear and hunger had transformed this supposed haven into a pressure cooker ready to explode. "We can't let this happen," Maya whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. I glanced at the dwindling supplies in our backpack, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. We had just enough for ourselves, but could we turn a blind eye to the woman's plea? Before I could respond, a voice boomed from the back. An older man, his weathered face etched with wrinkles of experience, stepped forward. "Enough," he commanded, his voice surprisingly strong. "We're in this together, or we're all dead. That's the rule. Now, help him up and share what you can. We'll figure things out." A grudging silence descended. Slowly, a couple of people stepped forward, offering scraps of food and water. The woman helped her injured husband to his feet, a flicker of gratitude shining in her eyes. The tension eased, replaced by a fragile sense of unity. The man's words resonated. We were on the same sinking ship. The question was, could we work together to stay afloat, or would desperation tear us apart before the supernova did? Later that night, huddled together on our cot, Maya broke the silence. "What if he's right? What if we can only survive if we help each other?" "I don't know," I admitted, the knot of guilt in my stomach loosening slightly. But seeing that woman, it feels like something needs to change. A sliver of hope flickered in the oppressive atmosphere of the basement. Maybe there was more to this shelter than just desperate individuals clinging to survival. Maybe, just maybe, a sense of community could emerge from the ashes, even amidst the chaos and fear. It was a fragile hope, but in the face of the impending end, it was all we had. The days ticked by like a metronome counting down to oblivion. The tension within the shelter remained precarious, a constant dance between desperation and a fragile sense of cooperation. The older man, who'd introduced himself as Henry, took charge. He organized a rationing system, dividing our meager resources fairly. He even convinced a former electrician, a skinny man with nervous eyes named Tom, to rig up a makeshift radio from salvaged parts. One evening, static crackled through the speakers, followed by a faint, distorted voice. A news report, barely discernible through the interference. It spoke of increased solar flares, societal breakdown outside the shelters, and a government initiative to relocate those deemed essential to underground bunkers. Despair washed over me. Essential. We were just regular people, clinging to a sliver of hope in a crumbling world. Were we expendable? Essential. What a joke. A deep voice rumbled beside me. John, the man with the injured arm, scoffed. Don't let them get you down. Maya said, squeezing my hand. We still have each other. Her words were a balm, a reminder of the fragile bonds forming within the shelter. We may not be essential, but we were no longer isolated individuals. We were a community, a collection of misfits forced together by circumstance, but finding strength in unity. The next morning, Henry announced a discovery. While scavenging the upper floors, he stumbled upon a locked room filled with medical supplies. A forgotten nurse's office. Hope surged through the room. With Tom's help, they managed to pry open the door. Bandages, antibiotics, even a rudimentary surgical kit. Resources that could be the difference between life and death. But the elation was short-lived. A new problem arose. John's infection was worsening. His injured arm had turned red and swollen, a feverish tremor racking his body. He needs real medical attention, Maya said, her voice trembling. We can't help him here. Henry's face hardened. Those bunkers, they might have what we need. A tense silence followed. The bunkers were off limits, heavily guarded and out of reach for ordinary people like us. But John's life hung in the balance. We have to try something, I said, a newfound determination, hardening my resolve. Fear could keep us trapped, but maybe, just maybe, a little bit of courage could lead us towards a chance, however slim. We huddled together, formulating a desperate plan. It was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was our only hope. The question was, were we willing to risk everything to save one of our own? The following hours were a blur of nervous preparation and whispered instructions. Tom, fueled by a mix of anxiety and ingenuity, managed to modify his makeshift radio. We hijacked the building's ancient intercom system, hoping our signal would reach the surface, hoping someone on the other end would listen. Attention surface personnel. Henry's voice crackled over the speakers, surprisingly steady. We have a critically injured civilian here who requires immediate medical attention. We understand regulations, but we are offering a trade. Medical supplies for safe passage to a designated shelter. Silence. An agonizing silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Just as despair threatened to engulf us, a distorted voice sputtered to life through the speakers. This is Captain Miller. Repeat, Captain Miller. We hear you loud and clear. Show proof of the injured and the medical supplies on the security camera feed. and we'll consider your offer." Relief washed over me, so intense it felt like a physical wave. A chance, a sliver of hope. With shaking hands, we helped John to an open area visible from the security camera. His face was pale and clammy, beads of sweat clinging to his forehead. Time seemed to distort again. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Then a voice crackled through the speakers, rough yet strangely comforting. "Confirmed. You have medical supplies we desperately need. Prepare for extraction at the northwest loading dock in 30 minutes. Disarm yourselves and remain visible on camera." 30 minutes. 30 agonizing minutes filled with frantic packing and hushed goodbyes. Would they honor their word? Or would they renege, leaving us at their mercy? As the clock ticked down, a growing sense of dread settled in my stomach. This was a gamble, a desperate leap of faith with unknown consequences. "We did the right thing, right?" Maya asked, her voice laced with apprehension. I squeezed her hand. "We had to try," I whispered, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. We were stepping out of the relative safety of the shelter into a world filled with unpredictable dangers. But for John, for the fragile sense of community we built, the risk was worth taking. The question was, would it be enough? 30 minutes felt like an eternity. We huddled together in the center of the room, the silence broken only by ragged breaths and the rhythmic beeping of a makeshift timer Henry had constructed from an old clock. Tensions were high, a cocktail of fear and desperate hope swirling in the air. "Do you think they'll keep their word?" Maya whispered, gnawing on her bottom lip. "We don't have much choice but to believe them," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Every creak, every groan of the building sent a fresh wave of anxiety coursing through me. The world outside the shelter felt like a foreign land, a place of uncertainty and potential danger. Suddenly, a distorted voice crackled through the intercom. "Attention shelter personnel. Extraction team approaching northwest loading dock. Remain calm and cooperate." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Relief, but also a heightened sense of alertness. This was it. The moment of truth. We helped John, weak and feverish, to a makeshift stretcher fashioned from a door and blankets. With heavy hearts, we said goodbye to the people who had become our unlikely companions in this desperate struggle. "Be safe," Henry said, his voice gruff but laced with genuine concern. "And remember, we're all in this together." I nodded, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. These weren't just strangers anymore. They were fellow survivors, bound by the shared struggle for existence. Reaching the loading dock, a desolate wasteland greeted us. Dust swirled in the dying light, abandoned vehicles littering the street like the bones of a fallen giant. In the distance, a heavily armored military truck rumbled into view, a stark contrast to the decaying cityscape. Two figures emerged from the vehicle, clad in biohazard suits and carrying imposing rifles. The air crackled with tension as we cautiously approached. "Medical supplies," one of the soldiers demanded, his voice muffled by his helmet. Henry stepped forward, handing over a clearly labeled box filled with bandages, antibiotics, and other medical necessities. The soldier inspected it briefly, then barked a curt order. "Load them in. Injured first." John was carefully lifted into the back of the truck, his face pale against the stark white of the stretcher. Maya and I scrambled in after him, a knot of fear tightening in my gut. As the truck pulled away, leaving the crumbling shelter behind, I stole one last glance at the figures huddled at the loading dock. Their faces, etched with worry and a flicker of hope, remained etched in my memory. We were leaving, but a part of us would forever be bound to that damp basement a testament to the unexpected camaraderie forged in the face of oblivion. The journey to the designated shelter was a blur. The world outside was a desolate wasteland, a chilling preview of the devastation the supernova promised. Yet, amidst the fear, a tiny spark of hope flickered within me. We were alive. We had faced a desperate situation and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. And that, in this new world, was all that mattered. The designated shelter was a stark contrast to the cramped basement we left behind. It was a sprawling underground complex, bustling with activity. Rows of bunk beds stretched across brightly lit hallways, a medical bay hummed with efficient activity, and a makeshift cafeteria served hot meals, a luxury we'd almost forgotten. John, his fever receding and colour slowly returning to his face, was treated with a level of care we hadn't dared to hope for. Maya and our assigned adjoining bunks, a far cry from the makeshift cot we'd shared. "It's a lot," Maya murmured, her eyes taking in the rows of unfamiliar faces. "Almost overwhelming. More people, more resources," I countered, trying to sound optimistic. We had traded the camaraderie of the few for the anonymity of the many. It was an unsettling change, but also a step towards survival. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed across the room, amplified by loudspeakers. A man in crisp military uniform stood at the head of a makeshift stage. "Welcome, survivors," his voice boomed. "You've shown resilience, courage, and a will to live. Qualities we desperately need in these trying times." He droned on about resource conservation, strict protocols, and the importance of maintaining order. While his words offered a semblance of hope, a chilling undercurrent ran through them. This was no longer about survival, it felt like control. Later that day, we explored the complex, navigating labyrinthine corridors lined with informational posters. One stark image in particular caught my eye, a schematic of the underground shelter network, interconnected but access strictly restricted. "Essential personnel only," Maya read aloud, pointing at an underlined section. "Does that mean us?" I shook my head, a sense of unease settling in my stomach. The desperation of the basement shelter seemed quaint compared to the rigid hierarchy of this vast complex. We were survivors, yes, but were we considered essential in this new world order? In the days that followed, a gnawing feeling grew within me. We were fed, provided for, but there was a constant air of surveillance. Our freedom, our very lives, felt subject to the whims of these faceless authorities. One evening, huddled on our bunks, I voiced my growing anxieties. "Do you think we made the right choice leaving the shelter?" "What choice did we have?" Maya replied, her voice laced with apprehension. "But you're right, this place is different." A determined glint flickered in her eyes. "We can't just sit here. We need to find out what's really going on." The seed of rebellion had been planted. We didn't know who to trust or what secrets this vast complex held. But one thing was clear: in this world ruled by fear and control, surviving wasn't enough. We needed to fight for a future where humanity, not just the deemed essential, had a chance to survive and rebuild. The sterile efficiency of the underground complex began to grate on my nerves. Every movement felt monitored, every conversation potentially overheard. John, thankfully on the mend, shared our unease. "This isn't a shelter," he muttered one afternoon, watching a pair of guards patrol the mess hall. "It's a prison." "Maybe," I conceded, lowering my voice, "but a prison with hot meals and working showers." John scoffed. "Luxury doesn't mean freedom. They haven't even told us where we are, how long this will last." His words echoed my own growing frustration. We were fed, kept healthy, but treated like pawns in a game we barely understood. Maya, ever resourceful, had noticed a restricted access terminal tucked away in a corner of the library. It was heavily guarded, but a spark of rebellion flickered in her eyes. "That's where the answers are," she declared, her voice hushed with determination. "We just need to get past those guards." Obsessed with the idea, we spent the next few days observing the guards' routines, their patrol routes, and the brief windows of opportunity. It was a risky plan, bordering on reckless, but the alternative, remaining clueless pawns, felt suffocating. Finally, one evening we saw our chance. A shift change left a blind spot near the restricted terminal for a fleeting moment. With a shared glance, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. "Now," Maya whispered, her eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and excitement. We darted across the deserted library floor, hearts pounding a frantic rhythm. Reaching the terminal, Maya's nimble fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the basic security protocols she gleaned from observing the guards. A tense silence followed, broken only by the whirring of the terminal. Then a flicker on the screen. Access granted. Relief and a surge of triumph washed over me. We had breached their security, a tiny act of rebellion against the oppressive order. Now the real challenge began, deciphering the information hidden within the system. Lines of code scrolled by, a blur of technical jargon. Then a familiar term caught my eye. Project Exodus. My breath hitched. Was this the key to understanding our situation? With trembling hands, I delved deeper, unearthing a series of classified documents. Project Exodus, it turned out, wasn't just about sheltering a select few. It was about an escape, a one-way mission to a distant planet deemed potentially habitable. And we, the non-essential survivors, were not part of the plan. The revelation crashed over us like a supernova itself. Project Exodus, a one-way ticket to a distant, uncharted planet for the elite, leaving the rest of humanity to perish. Disbelief morphed into a white-hot rage that burned in my gut. "They're leaving us behind," Maya whispered, her voice barely a tremor. "Not just leaving us behind," John growled, his face pale with fury. "They're condemning us to die." A knot of rebellion tightened in my stomach. We had stumbled upon a chilling truth, but what could we do with it? Exposing them would likely mean a swift and brutal end. Yet, remaining silent felt like complicity. "We have to warn the others," I declared, my voice surprisingly steady. "They deserve to know." The following days were a blur of whispered conversations and cautious planning. We shared the information we gleaned with trusted individuals, the spark of rebellion catching like wildfire. John, a former construction worker, proved surprisingly adept at strategizing. Maya, with her natural charisma, became the voice of the movement. The day of our planned action arrived, a tense silence hanging heavy in the air. We had devised a distraction, a staged medical emergency near the mess hall. It was a risky gamble, but it was our only chance to gather the crowd's attention. As sirens wailed and guards rushed towards the commotion, Maya stepped onto a makeshift platform we constructed from overturned tables. Her voice, amplified by John's ingenuity with a salvaged microphone, rang out through the vast hall. "People of the shelter," she cried, her voice passionate. "They've lied to us. Project Exodus isn't about survival, it's about escape for the privileged few. They're leaving us to die." A stunned silence followed. Then a wave of murmurs grew into a collective roar of anger and disbelief. The truth, once exposed, had a devastating impact. The carefully constructed facade of order began to crumble. Chaos erupted as the crowd surged forward, demanding answers. Guards scrambled to contain the uprising, the sterile efficiency of the complex dissolving into a sea of shouting faces and flailing limbs. In the ensuing pandemonium, we slipped away, our hearts pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. We had ignited a spark, but the outcome remained uncertain. Would this be a futile rebellion crushed by the iron fist of the authorities? Or could it be the beginning of a fight for a future where humanity, not just the chosen few, had a chance? As the sounds of the uprising echoed behind us, we disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors, fugitives in our own shelter. The battle for survival had taken a new turn. We had exposed the truth, but the real fight for a future, for a chance at a new dawn amidst the impending darkness, had just begun.